side, I think, is fine.
Everybody. So I'm up here today. Forgive me if I'm a little bit.
Does this mic work?
Can you not hear me?
No.
We don't use it.
Talking because usually it's like.
We don't use this one very often. So.
Shall I go over there?
Yeah.
So forgive me if I feel rambling. I didn't really prepare for this. This is just something that happened to me, and I felt like, how can you prepare? You just tell the story as it happened. A few weeks ago, I was talking with Paul after the service, and we were talking about all kinds of different things, and the conversation led here and led there, and it led to a place where I told him something that had happened to me, and so he was like, would you be willing to tell this story? And I was like, of course. So I'm sure some of you remember a handful of years ago, I had I was walking on like an S, and I had ruptured a disc, and I had back surgery, and once they figured out what it was after the surgery, it was like, oh, and then I was fixed, I was healed, I was ready to go, and it was wonderful. A few years later, same thing happened. I ruptured another disc, had to go into surgery, and when I came out of surgery this time, it wasn't quite the experience I had the first time. I was better, but I was good to, as good as I was going to be. So Tegan picks me up from the hospital, and I had to stop and get my medicines, and I had to do a few things and stuff, so I was out and about a little bit, but we got home, and for me with my back, it's better for me just to lay flat on the floor with my legs elevated, like over the ottoman or something. That's how I spent almost a year during that time, which is how I feel better. So after I got home from surgery, everything's taken care of. I laid down and fell asleep. And when I woke up later that evening, something was absolutely wrong. It was just wrong. And the pain, I had such bad pain, I could hardly get up. I didn't feel good. You can't really put a finger on it. Something was desperately wrong. Tegan had to help me sit down in the chair. I could hardly move. I was just like almost panicked because I felt so bad. And she got me to my bed, and where I spent the next, I don't even know how long, because I was just out of it. But as I laid in bed, I felt so bad. My vision went away, and I only saw shades of gray. I didn't see colors. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't walk to the bathroom without passing out, and just nothing but sweat all over me. It just totally out of it. Poor Tegan, I feel so sorry for her because she cried the whole time. She just was so worried about me. She was always checking on me. And I couldn't do anything. I felt horrible. And I started to have a little bit of a fever with it. And, like my husband was like, do I need to take you to the emergency room? But I work there, and I know, what are you gonna do? Okay, you've got a little bit of a fever. Okay, you don't have color in your vision. I mean, what do you do for that? You even though they would want to help me, there's nothing you can do for that. So it's like, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm, just gonna figure this out. Poor Tegan, she'd bring me food in bed, and I just could only just kind of lay there and eat it. And my family was calling, and my sister finally texted, if you do not respond to this text, I'm sending the police out to check on you. I was so sick. I just couldn't, I can't even explain. And so in the midst of this weird delirium, I'm laying in bed, just hurting and just totally out of it. The house could have been on fire, and there was nothing I could have done. And from, I don't know, nowhere, in my chest, a woman's voice spoke to me, and it came from in my chest. That's all I can say. It was a very calm voice. It wasn't scary, threatening or anything like that. It was a very comforting, warm, female voice. And she said, "You're not gonna survive this." And I'm laying there and I'm trying to talk to her. You know how you do it, in your head. And I said, I have to survive this. My daughter needs me. And I'm laying there, but I said, "But I'm so weak. I can't do anything for myself. I don't know what to do, but I have to survive this." And then she showed me, me laying in bed and Tegan walking into the room and finding me. And they were gonna attribute my death because why would somebody who's young and healthy die? There's no reason. It happens all the time. Believe me, I'm in the medical field. I know several people are too. It happens. People go in for a gallbladder and all of a sudden they're found dead. Why? Who knows? I don't know. And so they were gonna attribute it to me having taken too much pain medicine, and just because they didn't know what it was, and which is horrible to think about. Tegan would have to live with that. And it wasn't the case. Absolutely not at all. And so during this time, I'm laying there miserable, pain down my leg and back that I just can't even, it was horrible. Couldn't stand up, couldn't see, just sick, and too weak to do anything for myself. And, I was checking my temperature, because if it did get too high, then okay, I'd go in. And all of a sudden, it was like that. And the pain was gone. I saw colors. Instantly, I knew my fever was gone. And I was like, what the heck just happened? Literally, that fast. I picked up my thermometer and took it, and my temperature was like 4 degrees lower than it was just a few minutes ago. It was instantaneous. And I was just sitting there like, whoa, And Tegan walked in the room, and she's crying. She just is beside herself. And I was like, "Tegan, I'm gonna be okay." It was like that, "I'm gonna be okay." And she's crying, and she said, I was talking to Lori B, and she said, "Everybody at church prayed for me, and they're all worried." Sorry. They're all, really worried about you and all that. And I got to thinking, and I was like, how strange. It was a Saturday night, Saturday evening services. They all prayed for me, and right at that time, instantaneously, I was healed. And prayer saved me. It absolutely 100% saved me. I was not going to live for whatever reason, and the prayers of you all saved me. Absolutely 100%. And so I am a living testament that prayers work. They absolutely work, the smallest to the biggest, it doesn't matter. Prayers absolutely can save people. They saved me. And so, I always said I love this church because you all took Tegan in, and everybody knew Tegan's name before they knew me, which is fine, which I love. And because but I would be eternally grateful for this congregation just for something as simple as praying for me. How it saved me. I don't know what else to say other than that. And it's very powerful, and it is true, and hopefully I don't sound crazy because it really happened. But that is my story, and it changed my life, and I'm forever grateful. And I know that's why I get down and I know when I pray, it works, and it's true. And I thank everybody, and I still hope you pray for me still because I still need it. But at that time, honestly, it saved me. And anyway, that is my story, and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful.
After say that, that's very dangerous. So, but I think that's the whole idea of, when you think about it, it's Transfiguration Sunday today, and Peter sticks his foot in his mouth and says the wrong thing on the mountain that day, but yet he still has the experience. And later on, as he writes his letter, he says, you know what, we know this stuff isn't myth. This isn't a myth. We were on the mountain. We saw him transform. And I think Marcie's testimony, as we share our testimonies, it's a reminder that the stuff that we come to church for isn't just some empty myth that we made up. But as we share the reality of experiencing God with each other and for each other, then we go home with more than just, yeah, we believe these things, but we know that they're true. So I'm just going to really quickly talk a little bit about why we're here, because today we're meeting a little bit later to talk about, so what kind of facilities, what kind of direction are we going as a church. And as I was looking at the text, I'm not going to focus on the Transfiguration text, I'm going to focus on the one where in Corinthians Paul talks about Moses coming down the mountain and glowing, which actually connects with our Old Testament reading as well. And just be thinking, I never really looked so closely at how 2 Corinthians is such a clear picture of who we are to be as a church. Because at the beginning of the scripture that was read by Justin, just a few verses before that, because he started out saying, since then we act with such a hope, we have great boldness. But so where did the since then come from? And a few verses before that, in verse 5, Paul writes, not that we're confident of ourselves to claim anything is coming from us. Our confidence is from God, who made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant, not of letter, but of spirit. For the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. So, quickly, I promise to not spend a lot of time on this, but quickly, just thinking, why are we here? Are we here to just make sure that people hear the right information and believe the right things and do the right things? To make sure that they memorize the catechism and focus on all the right words? Or are we here to be ministers of the Spirit? Ministers of the presence of God? So you think about Moses, he was the one that came down with the Old Covenant. He downloaded onto his tablet from the cloud the 10 Commandments, or I saw that this week, I thought it was fun. But Moses was the one who had been on the mountain and God wrote the commandments on the tablet. He came down. Those commandments were meant to create an atmosphere, not where they would become focused on what was written on the tablets, but they were actually meant to cause them to more fully experience the presence of God in the midst of the community. So if they would have kept the commandments, they would have had intimacy with God, and they would have loved each other well. And did that end up happening as you read through the Old Testament? Did they follow the commandments so well that they always had an intimate connection with God and God's presence in their midst, and that they always loved each other and they loved the world? No. So we see God later on saying, okay, in Jeremiah 31, that the first covenant didn't accomplish what I wanted. I wanted a community of people who had intimacy with me, who out of experiencing my presence would reveal to the world my goodness. So God says, I'm going to make a new covenant with them, not like the one that was written on those stone tablets that people looked at from the outside, try to be motivated by them to do the right things. But I'm going to make a new covenant which really will give me what I wanted in the first place. And that was to have intimacy with my people. To have, so that they don't just know information about me written on stone tablets. But I'm going to write my law inside of them on their hearts so that they know me. And that's not just an intellectual knowing, it's an experiential knowing. So I'm going to get rid of their sins, I'm going to remember them no more so that they'll all know me from the least to the greatest. And that's the new covenant. That they'll finally get to know me for who I am. The husband who loves them, the one who delights in them. And so when I think about what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians, or in 2 Corinthians, and Paul says we're not ministers of the covenant that's written on stone tablets that tells people what to do, but we are ministers of the new covenant, which is experiencing God's life living inside of us, God's Spirit at work inside of us, so that we have experiences of what God can do, like what Marcie just shared, and not just being able to say by rote what the catechism says or quote Bible verses, but we have that experience of God's life living inside of us. So Moses came down. He actually, I think, had a good foretaste of what the new covenant was supposed to be. Because Moses wasn't afraid to be in God's sight. He took the veil off. He just enjoyed being in God's presence to the point where it physically transformed him. So he looked different when he came down the mountain. So as he came down the mountain, he didn't realize he looked different, but because he spent time just openly with God, it changed him. And as he got down, it made the people down at the bottom of the mountain a little bit uncomfortable. They said, "We don't know how to deal with you, Moses. Tell us what we're supposed to do. Give us the rules. We can handle rules. Just don't make us focus on looking at your glowing face, because we don't know how to handle that." And Paul says Moses probably was the one who had a little better idea of what this was all about in the first place, because he just enjoyed being in God's presence. He was transformed by the presence of God. He wasn't just focused on the rules. And I think sometimes we get church backward. We think, well, we need to get our Moses, we need to get our spiritual man or woman to be the church leader who goes and spends time up on the mountain with God, but we don't want that person to actually come and share that intimacy. We just want them to tell us what to do. We don't want you to share that you spend time listening to God or hearing what God's saying. We just want you to tell us the rules to follow so that we can be good people. And Paul says that's not what we're called to be. We're not called to be the people who are waiting on the ground for instructions of how to live a good life from the one holy person that spends time in God's presence. But we are all called to be ministers of the new covenant. Instead of one holy person, all of us are called to be the ones that, because of Christ, we all have the Spirit of God inside of us. We all are transformed not by following the rules that put us in bondage, but we're transformed by the freedom of the Spirit. That we freely love each other, we freely serve each other because we've experienced the love of God in our own lives. And I think that as we think about why we're here not to be ministers of the old covenant that come into a building to be told by the holy person what they're supposed to do, but are uncomfortable talking about actually having intimacy with God themselves. But we are called to be people who come together to be reminded that through the cross our sins have been forgiven and forgotten, and that we are not motivated by guilt or fear or shame anymore, but that we're filled with the Spirit that gives us freedom. Freedom to glow, freedom to take off the veil, freedom to share testimonies of how prayer makes a difference, freedom to share why we spend time at the railing every communion because of that intimacy with God. That as we think about where we're going, what does it mean that we are ministers of a new covenant? We don't just go to church for ourselves and then cover up our spirituality so nobody around us gets uncomfortable. But we actually help each other to take the veil off, to spend time in the love of God, to spend time transformed by the Spirit so we start looking different. Not because we're more stressed out or more interested in telling people what they're supposed to do, but that we just start looking like people who have spent time with Jesus. In the book of Acts, that's what it says. They knew that those people were different because they must have spent time with Jesus. What if the whole point of church is not to be so ashamed of God that we put on our veils so we don't get too stressed out as we try to follow our rules, but that the whole point is to learn how to take the veil off. The whole point is to just help each other to just enjoy time in the presence of God. And as we spend time allowing the Spirit to change us and transform us and to fill us with His love and give us gifts to use. We don't go to school or to church to be timid, but we go to church with boldness, Paul says. We go with boldness, with confidence, because we're all ministers of the new covenant. We're the ones that spend time with our veils taken off, enjoying God. We're the ones that have learned how to hear that voice speak to us. We're the ones who are not motivated by fear and shame and guilt, but we are set free by the Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. We're meant to look different to the world, not because we're more stressed out or judgmental than the world. That's what a lot of people think the church is all about. But we're meant to look different to the world because we'll look more beautiful than the rest of the world. There's a freedom that they have. There's a love that they have. There's an intimacy with God that they have. They must have spent lots of time just taking the veil off, spending time enjoying God. How can I be part of a community like that?